Hey, I'm Larissa from Beekeeping Made Simple, and this is about the Langstroth style hive and why I recommend it for beginner beekeepers. You can read about other hive styles if you like, but if you're getting started keeping bees, you're probably overloaded with information already. To keep it simple, keep a Langstroth style hive, and I'm going to explain why. One reason why the Langstroth style hive is what I recommend for beginner beekeepers is because that's what most people use. So if you want to find beekeeping equipment easily and cheaply, use a Langstroth style hive because that's what most beekeeping equipment websites sell equipment for. Next, if you are getting books, watching YouTube videos, talking to people in bee forums, beekeeping Facebook groups, going to your bee club, most people have Langstroth style hives. So if you go there, which is something I did, when I got started, I had 2 top bars. As soon as I would mention I had top bars, people were like, oh, I don't know what to do with top bars. They would be like, oh, that guy. There's the appointed guy in the bee club that knows about top bars. It's the only person you can ask. So when getting information, it's a lot harder to find information and to get help for other style beehives that aren't Langstroth style hives. I kept top bars my first few years, and it was a lot harder to overwinter a top bar hive. With a top bar style beehive, your beehive is one long box, kind of like the size and shape of a horse trough, and it doesn't get bigger or smaller. There's only a board in the center that you move out to make the inside space bigger or smaller for the bees. And so it's more difficult to overwinter that style hive. It can be done, but my first year, it's hard enough to figure out how to overwinter a hive, but usually bees move up in the beehive when it is winter time. They move up, going to the upper food storage. With a top bar hive, what happened to me, and is what is common for top bar beekeepers, is that your cluster may start in the center. And so if it does, they'll move to one side or the other following the honey food. And so they might be on one side of the beehive starving to death, and the other side of the beehive has lots of food. They just don't know it because it wasn't warm enough for them to break their cluster to go over to the food storage. My first year, my bees absconded, which means all of the bees take off. Swarming is usually when half the bees go with the queen, half the bees stay, but absconding is when they all go. And that happened. I made a top bar hive, painted it, left it out to air dry 4 months, but still I put a package of bees into that hive, and they took off as soon as the queen got out of her cage. And so I later read that that was a common thing for top bar style hives. If your hive has had bees already in it, or if you can go somewhere from a beekeeper to get honeycomb or something to put in it to make it smell like bees, that helps. But bees are more likely to abscond from the top bar style hive than the Langstroth style hive. Another thing that I really disliked about the top bar style hive is that the bars were just a bar. See, with the Langstroth style hive, you have these extra little pieces on either side, which creates a gap in between your frames. And so when you're putting your frames back in the hive and putting them together, you're not squishing a whole bunch of bees. With the top bar style hive, the bars are just a solid bar, and so it's really hard to get the bars together without squishing bees in between the bars. Now, I had read that top bar style hives were better for bees, and now that I've been doing this for 10 years, I do not agree. It's, there are swarms of bees that move into caves. There's a swarm of bees that continues to move into the overhang over the warehouse in the bee farm I used to work for decades. They've been there. They have moved into empty refrigerators, into sheds. I personally think that they'll move into almost any space that is a good size for them. I do not see how it helps them to be in a top bar style hive, and many people keep bees in Langstroth style hives, and their bees thrive and do very well. Now, the only time I do recommend a top bar hive over a Langstroth style hive is when you have difficulty lifting heavy equipment. And that is because these boxes, when full, can weigh over 50 pounds. And so Langstroth style hives aren't great for people that have trouble lifting heavy equipment. And if this is especially the case if you get a flow hive, because the flow hive is even heavier than just the regular wooden boxes with wooden frames. that you would be buying, like almost twice as much. And so if you have difficulty lifting heavy equipment, a Langstroth style hive that is kind of a hybrid with the top bar is the best thing. So most top bar style hives curve inward, which means you're just using a bar and the bees are building comb off of it. It can be really tricky to inspect this hive because you have no support system on all four sides for the honeycomb to be in. That means if you try to flip it around or go like this, there's a good chance that your piece of honeycomb is going to fall off. And when it does fall off, you have no support system, no structure around it to put rubber bands around it to put it back on. And so if you have trouble lifting heavy equipment, a long Langstroth is the hive style I recommend. So what it is it looks like a deep hive box for a Langstroth style hive, but it's just longer. And you don't stack boxes up, you just have that long box. And so the sides don't slope inward like a regular top bar hive, and you can use regular frames like from a Langstroth style hive you put in there. And so you have the benefit of not having to lift the heavy boxes anywhere, but you also have the structure and support of a wooden frame on all four sides. And you can also still put these frames into the extractor. Cannot use an extractor if you use a top bar style hive. Now there are other style hives. There's the sun hive and the warrior hive and a whole bunch of other kinds of hives. And these are all great to experiment with after you've been keeping bees for a few years. But in your first few years, keep it simple and make sure you're using a hive style that is a hive style that other experienced beekeepers you can talk to are also using. The other thing to keep in mind is to not experiment with hive styles where you do not have movable frames, which means you can pull a frame out, check on it, put it back in. This is very important because we have varroa mites. And you need to be able to manage your varroa mite infestations. You need to make sure your hive is not infested by mites, and you need to have a plan for what to do if an infestation happens. And so hives that do not have movable frames, like a skep, are hives that you should never keep as a beekeeper that is being considerate of the bee population and who cares about the health of the bees. Also, some counties don't even allow you to keep hives without movable frames. I believe in New York City does not allow people to keep bees in hives like skeps. All right, so that's why I recommend using a Langstroth style hive. Like I said, my first few years, I built a top bar because it was cheap and easier, and I read that it was better for the bees. I ended up just leaving them for another beekeeper to use because, I mean, and I'm not one to just leave things behind. I don't like to spend money on equipment if I don't have to, but I exclusively use Langstroth style hives now. I find that the bees also bring in a lot more honey with the Langstroth style hive. Now, if you, again, like me, like to geek out on random facts that you don't really need to know and aren't going to make you a better beekeeper most likely, but you know, are just fun to know about, here are some facts about the Langstroth style hive and the guy who invented it. So the Langstroth style hive was invented by a man named Lorenzo Langstroth. He's from Philadelphia, like myself. He invented it roughly 1851. He went to Yale, he was a minister, and he was a hobby beekeeper. Now, in the 18th century, a man named Huber, who was a very well-known beekeeper and did a lot of research in beekeeping, experimented with a style hive that had movable frames. However, his style hive did not really catch on. And there are beekeepers all over the world who had been experimenting with hive styles with movable frames, just like this Langstroth style hive. However, for whatever reason, Langstroth is accredited with this invention as opposed to other beekeepers who also came up with it. So before beehives had movable frames, people kept bees in containers like skeps, which is like a woven basket, or they had them in clay pots. And they didn't know what was going on in the beehive. They didn't know how much honey there was. Maybe if it was in a cave, you would be able to get a glimpse and see down below what was going on. But you pretty much just left the bees to do their thing, and then when you wanted to harvest honey, you just pull some comb out. Maybe you would destroy the whole hive and they'd have to rebuild completely, or maybe you would just be able to take some of the comb. Now what Langstroth did was notice that there was this space, which is like roughly 3/8 of an inch, and when the space is about 3/8 of an inch, the bees don't build anything in that space. If it's greater than 3/8 of an inch, he was noticing that bees built comb. And if it was a lot smaller than 3/8 of an inch, they would propolize that gap. So what he did was play off of that space of 3/8 of an inch and created movable frames. It allowed just enough of a gap between the sides of the wall of the box that the bees didn't propolize it, and just enough of a gap between the frames that the bees didn't build honeycomb to connect the frames together. With these movable frames, this allowed the beekeeper to do things to prevent swarming. It allowed the beekeeper to see what the overall health of the hive was. And it allowed the beekeeper to take honey out of a section and put the frame back in so the bees could rebuild in that section. This was really a revolution to beekeeping, and still, other than the extractor and electricity, one of the biggest things to happen to the beekeeping industry. Thanks for watching my video about the Langstroth style hive. If you're thinking about getting started keeping bees, check out our free getting started guide at beekeepingmadesimple.com. Right there on the home page, you can download it, and it has the 7 steps that I recommend you take before you buy your bees. If you'd like to see more beekeeping how-to videos, we update them every week, so hit the subscribe button, and then I think there's a bell you're supposed to hit, and that lets you know when new videos are actually out. Thanks for watching. Bye.